Alright, today we're going to go over drawer construction, corner joint construction. We're going to use a blind dovetail right here in the corner of the drawer. Essentially, this is what it's going to look like. This is a drawer that we're making. We're going to go over how to determine the size of the drawer and the board, or each piece that exists within the drawer, and how to make this blind dovetail joint using the router and the blind dovetail jig affiliated with the router. The first thing we have to do is determine the size of each piece that exists within the box or the drawer. Okay, so to do so, essentially, if you look up here, here's kind of the project we're dealing with. It's like a desk. I have it kind of drawn out here, basic drawing, but here is the cabinet that exists within the desk. We're trying to make a drawer that fits right here at the top of the desk. So to determine the size of the boards that we need within this drawer, we're going to look from our face frame. So what I've done here is I've drawn our face frame over here, basically just two-dimensional, and how we are going to determine each piece within the board or within the box or drawer is based around this face frame. First thing you need to figure out is how deep you want the drawer. So how far down into the box or into the drawer do you want it to go? Okay, that's variable depending on what your use is. Usually it's around 4 to 6 inches, and that can be variable based on your need. So in this situation, on the demonstration I'm going to be doing, I'm making the box or drawer 4 inches deep. That measurement is variable. That's a rip measurement you're going to make on the table saw. When we're looking at our face frame to determine the front and back of our drawer, we're going to come over here and we're going to subtract 1 inch from the opening. So we would measure this opening and subtract 1 inch. That's going to be the length of the front and the back of the drawer. Once again, inside width -1 equals drawer width, front and back length of material for the drawer. So once again, we're going to measure this opening, subtract 1 inch. That's going to be the exact measurement for front and back. Why we are subtracting that 1 inch is each drawer guide takes up 1/2 inch on each side of the box or drawer. So we're accommodating for those drawer guides so that drawer can slide in and out easily on mechanical drawer guides. So that is the reason for subtracting 1 inch. The next thing we're going to do is determine the length of the drawer, or how far into the cabinet it will go. Okay, now you don't always have to make it go the full depth of the cabinet. As you can see here, here is the depth of my cabinet. I have -1 inch. So again, if you have an extremely deep cabinet, you do not have to make your drawer go all the way that deep, or 2 inch intervals based on the drawer guide. So drawer guides come in 2 inch intervals, 12, 14, 16, 18, 22, 20, so on and so forth. So 2 inch intervals. We can base the depth, if we do not want it to go the full depth of our cabinet, based on the length of our drawer guide. To determine this side length here, what we're going to do is take the side, overall side length, and -5/8. So if we want the overall side length of this, say we're using 18-inch drawer guides, we're going to want this to be 18 inches. We're going to subtract 5/8 from that and come up with 17 3/8. Okay? Why we are subtracting 5/8? Our material thickness in most drawers is smaller. I make all my drawers at 5/8 inch thick. Some people make them at 1/2 inch. Some of it's based on if you're making it out of solid wood or plywood. If you're making it out of plywood drawer, which is not as desirable, it's sold in 1/2 inch thickness. So in that situation, you would be subtracting 1/2 inch, because this dovetail, since it's blind, it is not coming all the way through the front board, as we can see here. So you're subtracting half the thickness of the front and the back board to determine the length of this side. So as you can see here, let me try to get it in view. The overall length, based on my reference, say this was 18 inches, I have 5/16 and 5/16 on each end, which equals, if I add those together, equals 5/8. Okay? So that's how I determine my side length. So I have now done a little bit of the leg work already. I jointed one edge of this board. I ripped all 4 pieces on the table saw at the exact same time, or possibly out of the same board, depending on where you're getting your material from. All of them are ripped at the same setting on the saw to 4 inches in my particular situation here. That's how deep I want my drawer to be, is 4 inches. Okay? So once we have done that, we determined the opening of our cabinet to be 13 3/4. So I subtracted 1 inch from that. These are 12 3/4 in length for my front and back of my board. And then we took my overall depth, which I'm going with 18-inch drawer guides. So I subtracted 5/8 of an inch from that, coming in at 17 3/8 for both of my side lengths. So right now I have 4 boards, all are ripped to exactly 4 inches in width. Okay, after I ripped them all to 4 inches in width, I set up a stop block for both my front and back, cut them to 1 inch shorter than the opening in my face frame, and then I determined my drawer guide that I was using, and I've subtracted the thickness of the material, which once again I planed all this to 5/8 of an inch, from the overall length that I wanted, which was 18, and I have my sides at 17 3/8. Okay, we're out as it's going to exist. So it's going to exist like this, and what we want to do is go and identify each corner. I'm going to label these with letters. So I have AA, BB, CC, and DD. As you can see on there, I labeled each of them with a letter. And then I'm also going to mark the inside of every single board that exists within the drawer. So I'm going to mark the insides of my front and back, insides of my sides. Once we have laid the drawer out how it is, labeled each of the mating corners, we are now going to proceed to the dovetail jig, where we will start to cut this out. So in looking at our dovetail jig here, it is actually engraved on the top of here. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it reads, front and back go here, inside up. So that is why we labeled the inside. If you look here, it's also engraved on the front of here, sides go here, inside out. So that is telling you how to place the boards in there. As you guys can see here, I've also got some build up here to help keep the jig square. Since I'm not going to be cutting on this end, I cut this out of the scrap that I used and made sure I planed it to the exact same thickness. I also took a couple pieces of scrap here and made a practice cut on that scrap, making sure that the settings on the dovetail were set correctly, so that before I worked in the actual stock that was going to be my drawer, I knew that it was going to perform the task that I wanted. Okay, now that we're here at the dovetail jig, as you can see, I have a dovetail bit. It has to have this collet, or this adapter inside the bottom of the router to follow the path of the jig. This prevents the bit from coming in contact with the aluminum guide. Obviously, we don't want to have that. How you control the tightness of your dovetail joint is by the depth of the router bit sticking out of the sub base of the router. I have this preset. It is almost always set to the correct depth in the shop for the joints that we are making, but once again, we always want to make a practice cut before doing so to ensure that we have a nice, tight, strong joint. Once we have our router depth set, we have our jig ready, we're going to proceed over and get the boards that we're going to cut our dovetail in. So as you can see, I grabbed 2 boards, both lettered with an A, so they're mating corners, and I have at least one identified as my front or my side, and they both have letter I's on the inside of them identifying the inside. as already referenced on the jig, it says front and back go here, inside up. So this is my front, inside up. So that's going to make my letter A point to the left. So I'm going to insert that in there. On here it says side goes here, inside out. So my inside is out. My letter A should be mated with the letter A on my front. So they're going to be facing in the same direction. So right now the letter A on my sideboard is facing all the way over to the left, and my inside is facing out. There's a little shoulder right here on the jig. We want to make sure the board's all the way up, tight against that shoulder, and fastened down and secure so it will not move. Now we're going to do the same thing with the top, or actually the front of my drawer. Inside up, letter A is facing the left. I'm going to make sure it's pushed all the way over against the shoulder here. As you can see here, it's automatically creating an offset in between the boards. This one's the front is extended further over. That is going to create the matching dovetails so that it can lock into one another. So once again, I want to make sure that that is pushed all the way over against that fence, and I want to see the seam where the surface of the side and the end of the front is nice and tight and there's no cracks in there. Then I'm going to tighten this clamp down so that my side, my front is secure and cannot move. It's all the way over against the shoulder. Again, to have a nice tight joint, you want to double check that and make sure it's properly in place. Make sure both of them cannot move. Now, with any router, we want to make sure the bit is not in contact with the wood, and especially not in contact with the metal when we start here. So we're going to take a peek under here before we start and make sure that we are away from anything before we start. Obviously, we don't want to be looking under there when we actually start this cutting process. We're going to be up here on top of the jig. Once we start this progress, we're going to pull the trigger, wait for it to reach maximum speed, and then basically follow these finger joints in the jig to create the dovetail. After I've made my cut, I always go back and look at the profile just in case I didn't stay up against the jig tightly. There's nothing wrong with going back and doing another pass. You cannot mess it up. At this point, we're going to take out one of our stocks. I'm just going to take out this side. I'm going to rotate my front around to the other side. Now at this point, since I have my inside still facing up, as it states on the jig, my letter B is facing this way. My letter B exists in my other side. So I'm going to get my letter B. I have a letter B here and a letter B here, both facing the same direction. My inside facing out. I'm just going to insert this directly in the jig as I did with the previous cut. So again, I'm going to ensure that the front is pushed all the way over to the left, up against that fence. I'm going to secure it. check to make sure that it cannot move. I'm looking to make sure that this seam is nice and tight between the side and the front, and I'm making sure that the side is pressed all the way over to the left as well. Now I'm going to repeat the process that I did before. At this point, my front is completely done. I have my dovetail slots cut on both ends of my front. I'm now going to proceed to my back. Once again, inside up. Letter D is facing in this direction in this situation. So I'm going to find my side that has the letter D on it. I'm going to make sure that the inside is facing out. Once again, slide it all the way up until it bottoms out on the jig. And repeat the process. For the fourth and final time, again, this side has dovetails cut on both ends, so it is complete. So I have one more pass to make. Again, keeping my inside up. I'm going to slide my letter C in there. Letter C is going all the way over to the left. I'm going to find the mating letter C, which is right here. It's going to be facing the left, and my inside is facing out. All right, now what we're going to do is cut a groove in the bottom of this drawer for the backing to go in. The only disadvantage to cutting the groove is you will have a little square hole in the side of your box where this groove passes all the way through. You can fill that with a little piece of square dowel once you complete it, and we can show you that once we glue the box up or drawer. So, the first thing we're going to do is set the blade height to half the thickness of our stock. This is going to be a multiple pass process if you're doing it on the table saw like this, because we're wanting the kerf, the path left by the saw, to be 1/4 of an inch, which is the thickness of our backing. Our bottom we're using for the drawer. So we will need that groove, the backing to fit in there. So inside is going to go down against the table. We already have our inside identified. And our letters are going to go against the fence on the table saw to keep the blade the furthest away from there as possible. Now what we want to do is we want to start, I leave at least 1/4 of an inch at the bottom of my box. So I'm going to start up about 1/4 of an inch from the bottom, if not a half. Once again, this is going to be a locking joint, so this bottom's actually locked in there. Okay? I actually want my back to be my last pass, and I'll show you that here why. So I'm going to start. I got my front board inside down against the table. Blade is set halfway through. I have my 1/4 inch from my bottom. First pass here. I'm going to do this with every single one of my boards, inside down, letter against the fence. Inside down, letter against the fence. Inside down, letter against the fence. Now I'm going to shut the machine off and tap the blade about 1/8 of an inch, or tap the fence rather, about 1/8 of an inch towards the blade. You want to go just under 1/8 of an inch so that the kerfs are overlapping. The width of the blade, once again, is 1/8 of an inch. At this point, I'm going to check to see if my backing or my bottom will fit in that groove. It will not, so I'm going to make a small adjustment. It will now fit inside that groove, so that is where I want it. I'm going to take every single one of my boards and pass it through there again. Now here is where it changes. I'm going to shut the machine off. In the back, I'm going to cut the entire back groove off at the same place that I have here, so I can slide the bottom in after I've glued my drawer together and square it up, essentially using the backing or the bottom of my box. So I'm going to set my board down here. I'm going to raise the blade up so it's extending just through the surface of the back. And I'm going to cut that groove off. So now that I've done this, if we lay our box back out how it is to go, we have our back. Once again, I'm putting all letters down against the table. Back. So this is C and C. D and D. B and B. And A and A. So I went ahead and laid the box or drawer out exactly the way it's going to go. It's upside down so that you can see that I've cut the whole entire back groove off of here. Next time we're going to tap this together and show you how to put the bottom in. Again, it's going to be an extremely short video in the next one.